Hello, everyone. This is John. He lives in the United States, where he uses the US dollar almost every day. Now he wants to travel to Germany, where the euro is used as the currency. But when John tried to exchange money, he found out that one US dollar is equal to 90 euro cents. After that, John went to Vietnam, where one US dollar is over 26,000 dong times. Why do currencies have different values? Why isn't one US dollar equal to 1 euro or 1 dong? And why do exchange rates change every second? In this video, we'll take a deeper look into the world of currency, exchange rates, and why currencies are not equal in value. Before talking about the reasons behind the differences in currency value. First, let's take a quick look at the history of money. For a long period of time, currencies were directly linked to precious metals, such as gold. This system was called the gold standard. Under the gold standard, a country's currency was backed by a specific amount of gold, a fixed amount. For example, the US dollar was once tied to a fixed amount of gold. This helped maintain stable exchange rates. Because a country couldn't print more money without having more gold, it prevented governments from printing too much money. But as economies grew and global trade expanded, countries began to abandon the gold standard. Maintaining enough gold to back every unit of currency became increasingly difficult. By the 1970s, most countries had switched to a new system called fiat money. Fiat money has value because the government declares it, and people believe in that value. It isn't backed by any physical asset like gold. That's why some people call it fake money. If you want to learn more, let me know in the comments. Because fiat money has no intrinsic value. Its value depends on whether people still want to use it or not. If many people want money, they will compete to get it, causing the value of that currency to rise. But if no one wants the currency, its value will drop. So the value of fiat money comes from supply and demand. That's why currencies of strong economies, like the US dollar, tend to have higher value because more people want them. While the currency of weaker economies, such as Venezuela, which is experiencing hyperinflation, is worth much less because no one wants it. Part 1. Inflation. Inflation is when a currency begins to lose value. Simply put, it's when there is more money than goods available. And services. When a country has high inflation, the value of its currency will decrease. Why? Because no one wants to buy and hold a currency that is losing value. For example, in 2022, you could buy 2 loaves of bread for $10. But due to high inflation, 2 years later, in 24, you could only buy 1 loaf of bread for the same $10. A real-world example is Zimbabwe. In the 1980s, the Zimbabwean dollar was more valuable than the US dollar. 1 Zimbabwean dollar was equal to 1.35 US dollars. But due to failed land reforms, economic problems, corruption, and uncontrolled money printing, the value of the Zimbabwean dollar collapsed. By the 2000s, 1 US dollar was equivalent to nearly 600,000 Zimbabwean dollars. The government tried to fix this by changing currencies many times, but eventually gave up and began using more stable foreign currencies. Although recent news shows that Zimbabwe is trying to revive its original currency. So, kudos to them for never giving up. Go Zimbabwe. Part 2. Interest rates. Interest rates are the cost of borrowing money expressed as a percentage. If you borrow $1,000 at 10% interest, you must repay $1,000 plus $100 in interest. Central banks, such as the US Federal Reserve, set interest rates for their countries. When a country has high interest rates, investment returns are higher, attracting foreign investors. These investors need to buy that country's currency to invest, which increases demand and strengthens the currency. For example, suppose you want to buy government bonds. Government bonds are when you lend money to the government for a fixed period of time. After that, the government repays you with interest. For example, let's say you buy a $1,000 government bond with a 5% interest rate for 10 years. This means the government will pay you $50 every year for 10 years. The logic is, the higher the interest rate, the higher the investment return. If interest rates in the US are higher than in Germany, investors may sell euros and buy US dollars to invest in US bonds or higher yield US savings accounts. When demand for US bonds rises, the US dollar becomes stronger. On the other hand, if US interest rates fall, returns become lower, and investors may look elsewhere, reducing demand for the US dollar. However, a country cannot simply raise interest rates to the maximum just to attract investors. Remember that interest rates are the cost of borrowing money. High interest rates also mean that people and businesses in that country will have to pay more when borrowing money. If borrowing becomes expensive, fewer people will buy homes or start new businesses. This can slow down the economy and lead to unemployment. Therefore, central banks need to raise or cut interest rates based on the country's situation. And that is why everyone gets nervous when U.S. interest rates are announced. Part 3. National conditions and foreign investment. When China opened its market in the late 1970s, many foreign companies began doing business there. If they wanted to build factories in China, of course they needed Chinese yuan to buy land, build facilities, and pay workers. So this increased demand for the yuan, making the currency stronger and bringing China a lot of money. That is why most countries actively promote themselves to attract foreign investors. They want investors to do business there. However, foreign investors won't invest in just any country. They look for countries with stable politics and stable economies. A stable government means consistent rules and regulations. If a country suddenly raises taxes, business costs will increase, and businesses may lose money. If a country keeps changing laws, companies won't feel safe investing there. Similarly, frequent protests or strikes can disrupt production. A stable economy is also important because it means the country's currency is less likely to suddenly lose value. If a country has a lot of public debt or high inflation, foreign investors fear they may lose their capital. So a stable country attracts more investment, helping maintain a strong currency. Section 4. Imports and exports. When Japan exports cars to other countries, those countries need Japanese yen to buy them. This increases demand for the yen. On the other hand, if Japan imports coal from Australia, it needs Australian dollars to purchase the coal. This increases demand for the Australian dollar. Most countries try to export more, so other countries will need their currency, making it stronger. For example, when the U.S. persuaded oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia to sell oil only in U.S. dollars, global demand for the dollar increased. Since almost all countries need oil, they must use U.S. dollars to buy it. This turned the U.S. dollar into a global currency. This strengthened the currency and the U.S. economy and influence as the world's #1 power. It became known as the petrodollar. Although there are rumors that Saudi Arabia is trying to accept other currencies as well. I can make another video about that if you want. Meanwhile, small Pacific Island nations like Tuvalu don't have many goods to export, so their local currencies aren't widely used. Thus, they use stronger currencies like the Australian dollar for trade. Section 5. Fixed value. If you want your country to have a stable and strong currency, you can peg your currency to a stronger one from another country. For example, Brunei pegs its currency to the Singapore dollar at a 1-to-1 ratio. This means both currencies have the same value, and you can use Singapore dollars in Brunei and vice versa. Another example is Belize, which pegs its currency to the US dollar. They set the exchange rate so that one Belize dollar is always equal to half a US dollar. So if you want to exchange US dollars for Belize dollars, you don't need to check the exchange rate. You just double the amount. Fixing the exchange rate helps the currency stay stable and easy to manage, but the country will become highly dependent on the economy of the stronger nation. If the US dollar loses value, the Belize dollar will also lose value. So, if one currency lives, the other lives. If one currency dies, the other dies too. So why don't all countries use the same currency, such as a global dollar, so that we no longer need exchange rates? It sounds like a great idea, but it's not that simple. Let's take the euro as an example. It's very convenient for traveling between countries without needing to exchange money. But the challenge is that each country must give up control over its own currency to the European Central Bank. This means a country cannot change its monetary policy just to fix its own problems, because doing so might affect other countries. For example, when Greece faced a financial crisis in 2009, the impact spread to other countries in the Eurozone, Central Europe, and that's why Germany wasn't very happy with Greece. So, if all countries in the world use a single currency, it would be very risky. Imagine facing a crisis just because a distant nation messed up its economy. One country's problem would become the world's problem. So should we make our currency as strong as possible? The answer is not necessarily. A country that imports a lot, like Singapore, may prefer a strong currency to make imports cheaper. Meanwhile, a country that exports a lot, like China, may want a weaker currency so its products are cheaper. That's why China is often accused of deliberately lowering its currency value, also known as currency devaluation. I'll explain this in another video. If you want me to make more videos explaining these topics, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.